Am, and if this is bothersome, is that a problem?
I'll try to live with it. I've got a little tint in my glasses, so that's all right.
And let me know if you want me to stop for any reason. I will.
Okay.
Today is the 17th, Wednesday in August, and I'm speaking with Mr. William E. David. And I'd like to ask you to tell me a little something of what you remember of the World War II era.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is Pearl Harbor Day, which was on a Sunday, December the 7th, 1941, when I was in high school. And I remember the day rather vividly, and the announcement coming over the radio as to what was happening in Pearl Harbor. And of course, that meant that I would eventually find myself in the Army, which I did after graduating from high school, and went into, well, at that time I was living in Houston, Texas, and all of the new recruits from Houston went to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio as a kind of reception center. And after we were there for a brief time, taking a series of exams, tests, everything from IQ to what our particular talents might be, then we were sent in all directions. And it was decided at that time, you had, of course, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, the Coast Guard, and the Air Force was a part of the Army. So you had the Army Air Force. And it was decided that I would be in the Army Air Force, and I was sent to Shepherd Field, which was out from Wichita Falls, Texas, for basic training. And so I went there and went through the routine basic training, obstacle course, and taking turns at KP, and all of the things that went along with that experience. Then I was sent to Fargo, North Dakota, to a college there that I think it was a kind of an agricultural college, actually, in Fargo. But they
left us in Fargo, North Dakota.
Right. At the agricultural college there, where we were, a group of us were getting clerical training. And after the completion of that time, we were then, some of us at least, were sent to St. Louis, Missouri, to Jefferson Barracks, which was an old Army post there. And we did get, as I recall, about a 10-day furlough before having to report there. So that gave us a chance to return back home and have a brief visit with parents, friends, loved ones, before going on to St. Louis in Jefferson Barracks. And reported there, Jefferson Barracks, and we had additional training, including getting out in the boondocks and camping overnight in winter and snow and whatever. And come the last of December and around the 1st of January, we were sent by train, troop train, to Newport News, Virginia, to board a ship that we did not know where it was headed, but it headed out and eventually went around the Cape of Good Hope and on to Bombay, India. And I arrived there on my 19th birthday, February the 8th, 1943. Right. No, 44. Take that back. It was 1944. And then we were stationed at a British camp briefly in Bombay before catching a train that took us across India to Calcutta. And at that time, the Japanese had broke through from Burma, and we were put on a train that was a kind of a freight train. Well, it was a freight train to guard military equipment on the train, and at the same time to send us on north to Assam. And from there, a number of us were flown over the hump, as it was called, into Kunming, China, which was the headquarters of General Chennault's 14th Air Force. And I was assigned to the 18th Aerial Photography Detachment that was attached to the 14th Air Force. And did clerical work for them, not anything particularly heroic. It was just we had planes that would go over and take aerial photographs of territory in China and around the rim of China that was occupied by the Japanese, and then those photos would be brought back and interpreted, and we would simply prepare the reports, and they would be distributed to military people to be aware of what was happening in these particular areas where the Japanese were occupying. Then, as the war was getting closer to an end, we were transferred to a base outside of Chongqing, and to continue to do the same type of work. And then yours truly found himself in Chongqing on the night that the news came through that the Japanese had surrendered. I was also in that area when the bomb had been dropped, the two atomic bombs. And then the war ended, and once again, according to how long we had been overseas and a system of points, we were sent back. I flew back over the hump, ended back up in Calcutta, India, took a ship from there that made a complete round the world for me, because we went on by Singapore and on around near the Philippines and near Japan, actually, to where we could actually see the big Japanese mountain from the ship, and then came around and docked in Seattle, Washington area. Actually docked in Tacoma, and then took a train all the way back to San Antonio, back to where it had started, got discharged and went home. Now that's a quick story, a bare skeleton story. And I don't know, that's all factual. I don't know how much you want in terms of opinions, other things of that nature.
I'm looking for all I can get.
Yes. I will say a couple. Basically, I'm a very positive person. I'm reading a book right now that's the last book that Norman Vincent Peale wrote, to the best of my knowledge, entitled The Power of Positive Living. in contrast to his initial book of some 40 years ago, The Power of Positive Thinking. But I do have to confess that I think that it was not necessary to have dropped the atomic bombs on Japan. I have visited Japan since then, got a little feel of the terrible destruction that took place. I do not think that was necessary at all. I think they could have been dropped offshore, or they could have been dropped in a less populated areas. The message would have gotten through just as loud and just as clear. And thousands of lives and suffering could have been spared. I don't think that was necessary at all. That's Bill David's opinion. Another thing that I was not always pleased with the behavior of some of the fellow soldiers. I think that the behavior in terms of threatening, shall we say, sexual misbehavior with some of the Chinese young women and things of that nature, I think were out of line. But I would say that the vast majority of the military did behave themselves in an acceptable fashion. There were exceptions, as there always are, but the vast majority behaved themselves very well. I think that as a whole, I think the war was conducted well and planned well and executed well. There were boo-boos, and I think one of them was the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs in the fashion in which they were dropped. That's just my opinion.
Did you have an opinion one way or the other of Joe Stilwell, someone like that, commander?
Yes, I had, yes, I liked Joe Stilwell very much. I felt that he understood what was what he called general the Chinese what was the Chinese man?
Chiang Kai-shek?
Chiang Kai-shek. He referred to him as Peanut. He may have made his brain a little larger than what it should have been. Maybe something smaller than a peanut. May have been better to call him head of a pin, maybe. But I think that General Chiang Kai-shek was basically a two-bit dictator. And it's certainly understandable why the Chinese communists ultimately won. The amount of corruption that went under Chiang Kai-shek, he was far more concerned much of the time with fighting the communists than he was the Japanese. I think that Stilwell was very much aware of these things, and so I'm a real admirer of General Stilwell. I think he was a good man. I think he was insightful into what was happening, and he had a real problem trying to deal with the Peanut, as he called him. That's pretty opinionated, obviously.
What did you think of Roosevelt?
I was a supporter of Roosevelt. I thought he was certainly a competent president, and I think he was a sick man there at the last of his life, and probably far sicker than any of us realized he was. But I certainly had respect for Roosevelt and for what he did in trying to help the country, both in terms of the war and in terms of his social policies that he tried out, trying to help people, whether it was the CCC camps or the NRA or whatever it was. I mean, he was willing to try to do something to help people. And so I appreciate that. Appreciate Truman. I think Truman was a good president. and a man that tried to do a good job. You would guess, maybe it's not all that obvious, but perhaps it is, that I am in the Democratic direction, and not the Republican direction. But that's, each of us have our own opinions about different things. And anyway.
Can you tell me something about growing up and where you were during the years of the Great Depression?
Well, Mother and Dad, we grew up in Texas. Dad had a dry goods store in a town called Pasadena, which at that time was had a population of about 1,400. Today, I don't know, it could be 500,000. I don't know, but it's certainly grown. It was just a little, not much more than a little village outside of Houston. At that time, it was about 14 miles from the city limits of Houston to Pasadena. Today, I think it'd be impossible to tell when you left one and entered the other. It was, there were refineries there. That was the main way people made a living. And the Great Depression hit, and the workers in the refineries got laid off, and they had bought clothing and items from Dad on credit, which they were not able to repay. Dad, in turn, owed for the goods that he had purchased, and he wasn't able to pay his creditors, and so he went bankrupt. Also lost our home. But in contrast to the current tradition of people who go the bankrupt route, Dad continued to pay on his debts until they were all paid, 100%. And Dad took great pride in his credit rating because he never failed to pay a debt. It may have taken him a long time to do it because of having to take the bankruptcy route, but he paid them all off. And that was a good example for his son and for others, I think, to follow. People, I never will forget in later years, Dad was buying something in a Eckert's drugstore in Houston, and is routine these days to show your driver's license when you write a check. And here Dad was well into his 80s, and he was highly insulted that they wanted his driver's license and Social Security number in relation to his check. He had never written a bad check in his life, and well into his 80s, he wasn't going to start writing one then, and that he felt that they were questioning his credibility. This.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that every time, like today, I went to Kmart and Kroger's just for coming here, and of course that was a routine thing you do. But Dad wasn't too happy having to go through that routine. He felt they were really questioning his honesty, which in a sense that you are when you do that. But we're accustomed to it. And but I can remember during the Depression years, a little boy going to get a haircut in the Houston area, and the haircut for all, adults, children, whoever, was 14 cents. And I remember seeing the sign, haircut, 14 cents. I can remember after Mother and Dad lost the business and lost their home, moving in with mother's mother and father for a time. And I remember before that took place, Mother and Dad had a $10 gold piece that had been giving them for their wedding. And that was the last bit of money they had, and they cashed that to buy groceries. It was pretty rugged. I can remember Dad going out day after day hunting for work, and jobs were hard to come by. Eventually, he got into the nursing home business. He had a sister who was a RN and had been taking a few elderly people in her home to care for them while her own mother was ill, my grandmother, plus an uncle, her brother, who was ill. And so she and Dad got together and opened up what became the first nursing home in Houston, Texas.
Wow.
And so I'm one of the first people, maybe the only person you'll ever meet reared in a nursing home. But anyway, eventually we're able to, really World War II is what got us out of the Depression, ultimately. But you were very fortunate if you had a job during those days. You certainly were.
Did you have work as a student?
Yeah, I did two different things. I had a paper route for a time in Houston, the Houston Chronicle, which is a pretty well-known newspaper these days, afternoon paper. And then the last year in high school, my grandfather, not Dad's father, but my mother's father, was a lawyer with the legal department of Texaco in Houston. And I got a job as a office boy, mail clerk in the for Texaco in Houston before going into the service, and finished my high school at night before going into the Army. And they had a night school downtown Houston then, where you could go to school and finish up at night and work during the day, which I did. And so then went to college on the GI Bill after I got out of the
And what did you
Army.
study?
Well, I majored in history with a minor in religion and Greek. I was planning to be a minister-missionary, and went to Baylor University in Waco, Texas. Got 2 degrees there. Stayed and got a master's in history and political science. And then after that, I went to Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, and got my, well, at that time it was called a Bachelor of Divinity. It has since been officially changed to a Master's in Theology. And then I went to Vanderbilt and got my doctorate there in theology and philosophy. So
A lot of education.
had a lot of education, right.
So you must have been in graduate schools throughout the 1950s.
Yes, I got my doctorate in 1958. So, and I got my master's, first master's from Baylor in 1950. And I've got the master's in theology from the seminary in 54.
Where did you go after 1958?
Went to language school in Costa Rica, San Jose, Costa Rica, to study Spanish and Latin American culture. Spent a year there, and then went to Argentina, Buenos Aires. Taught in the Union Theological Seminary there, and was minister of a church in Buenos Aires.
For how long?
For 2 years. and then we returned to the States. There were some health problems, and it didn't work out to return, and ultimately ended up in Athens, Georgia. And for a time I was associated with the Christian College of Georgia,
Didn't know that.
which is where Unity is now meeting. I might pitch that in there. And then with the university until my retirement. Taught my last class in fall of '87.
How long were you with the Christian College of Georgia?
Oh, let's see, almost 6 years, between 5 and 6 years. Yeah.
And were you doing something else that took you to Athens right off the bat?
No, that was it. That was the only thing.
Christian College of Georgia to start
Yeah,
with.
yeah. At that time, the Christian College, a number of schools across the country, had denominations that had chairs of religion for the college. And I was in the chair of religion, teaching courses in religion for credit for students at the University of Georgia. There was an arrangement whereby that was done. And
Interesting.
yeah. Yeah, that was very common for a time. I don't know if there are any of those still left or not, but there were at the time. The University of Texas had a setup like that, and a number of schools did. State schools had denominational chairs of religion that they got credit from the college, state college. I don't know if there are any that are still doing that now or not.
Well, let's back up a little bit.
Yeah.
When you were in Argentina, were the Perón family in power?
No, I was in Argentina in, let's see, went there in 59 and left in 61, and they were not in power at that time. Mm-mm.
Well, those were
It was,
still tumultuous years everywhere.
well, somewhat. It got a lot more tumultuous in Argentina later on than it was when I was there. Just, you know, they had the scare of the communists and all of the arrest of young people that were disappearing and all that type of thing that took place after I left.
I ramble quite a bit, but I'd like to bring it around again.
That's all right.
You must have been living throughout the South and then again Argentina during those years of the Civil Rights Movement then.
Yes, we came back, yes, the Civil Rights. In Athens, the Civil Rights Movement was just really getting underway when we came here in '62. I mean, as far as Athens is concerned, it was the big court decision had already been made, but you still did not. I can remember the Greyhound bus depot, which was just a half a block away from the Christian College, and they still had segregated seating in the Greyhound bus depot to separate. Blacks would sit in one section, whites in another. They still had around town where there was a water fountain, they had the famous colored water. They would have
There's an oxymoron.
yeah, they would have a sign above a drinking fountain, colored, and came known as colored water. And it was there were a lot of tensions, and of course there were tensions on the campus as the first few blacks began to attend here, and
of course, what comes first.
yeah, and I guess anyway, I had one of the first black secretaries that anybody ever had was in my office. I worked both with the religion department and at the Georgia Center for Continuing Education, and I had a black secretary who incidentally is still at the university, and But that was very exceptional. I believe, if my memory's right, I believe she was the only black at the Georgia Center at that time. I mean, in a secretarial position. And there were none in a staff position at that time, as I recall. So there have been some real changes.
At Vanderbilt at that time, did you hear, you said you graduated in 58?
Yeah, when I was at Vanderbilt, I don't believe Vanderbilt had any black students.
Do you recall hearing anything of Montgomery bus boycott and the Martin Luther King? That was, you were at Vanderbilt before the sit-ins and stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I read about this, and of course I was out of the country for 3 years, see, from 58 to fall of 61, so a lot of that was going on while I was out of the country, and I just read about it.
I sometimes ask these questions, and I just happen to be asking them today. Do you recall any colored soldiers during World War II?
Oh, yes. We, on our ship coming back, we had a group of black soldiers that were on there with us. However, I believe that we were housed separately on that ship because I remember seeing them on the ship, but I don't recall being in the same sleeping area with them. So I think there was a form of segregation even on the troop ship.
Well, were you glad to be home? Did you do anything to celebrate?
Oh, I was glad to be home. I certainly was. It was good to get back, and I was anxious to get on into school because I was, well, let's see, stop and think a minute here. 45, 46, I was 21, which not being old, but is a little bit older than the typical college freshman. A whole group of veterans returning to college, and so that was an exciting time to get on with school. And I knew I had a lot of education ahead of me, and I was ready to get on with it, and gave myself to it very seriously. Maybe more seriously than I would have had I started when I was 18. And this was true of a lot of veterans. There were, some veterans were married and had children. Many were not. But as a whole, I would say they were a pretty serious group of students, really. And because, they were older and more mature and had goals in mind to get out and make it, and so put their shoulders to the wheel and went to work, so to speak.
Did you marry?
Did not marry until I was in seminary. I was 27 before I married. So there again, that's my marrying age was more in keeping with what's happening today maybe than what it was then. Yeah, it was more exceptional to be that old getting married then. You
mentioned to me yesterday that you had just remarried.
Yes.
Recently?
Yes.
Recently?
Well, 88. That's fairly recently. That's a little over 6 years ago. Yeah.
Any children?
By the first marriage, I had 3 sons and a daughter. And my wife had 3 daughters by her first marriage. Of course, they're all adults now. And
well, can you recall anything for me about the lifestyle during the World War II era, was there anything you lacked in the way of food or
Oh, of course, there was rationing of some items, like sugar, for example, but no, that really wasn't any problem. I think here again you get some interesting contrast. I'm back to high school at this point. In those days, it was very sexual activity in high school was of anything more involved than just typical petting and spinning the bottle type, high school dances, but what we would call sexual activity in a serious way was practically, tempted to say unknown. That would be stretching a little bit too much, but I mean, to have a pregnancy in high school was, that was so rare. I don't remember seeing a one in my high school. Not one. And I was in a high school in Houston with almost 2,000 students, so that'll give you an idea. That doesn't mean that out of the 2,000 there wasn't a case of pregnancy, but I didn't know about it. So that gives you an idea of the contrast with today. And to have children out of wedlock in those days was percentage-wise very insignificant. I mean, you had my grandmother, there was what was called the Crittenden home, which was a home for unwed mothers where they would go during their last days of pregnancy before they gave birth, and in most cases their children would be put out for adoption. And but that was kept very secretive. They were what we would call today no information patients, that I'm sure in many cases even relatives and close friends didn't know they had had a baby. I mean, they would just let the word out that they were going to study for a few months someplace else or something.
You used the phrase no information patients. You have been doing a lot of work at the Athens Regional Medical Center.
Right.
How long have you been doing that?
Oh, a little over 2.5 years now.
What sort of duties? What sort of...
Well, I'm what's called a patient representative, and we visit all of the patients, at least initial visit, to let them know that they have a representative, an advocate for any needs that they may have, or any complaints that they may have, and that we're there to be of help to them. And this can range from lost and found items, which you might guess are always things getting lost, to deaths. We get involved in all of the deaths in the hospital, and everything from comforting the family to doing the paperwork that results in the death certificate and these things. And so we find ourselves doing a variety of things. Working with the families. Oftentimes the families are going through a very tragic grief period as they try to adjust to losing a loved one or the possibility of losing a loved one. So it's a challenging work. I enjoy it very much. Certainly do. I'm basically a people person, and I enjoy working with the people in that context.
Do you often see people of the generation of World War II at the hospital there?
Oh yes, yes, I should say so. Right.
often.
And of course, that's one way in which my age is an advantage there, because so many of the patients would represent my generation, and therefore might feel somewhat more comfortable talking with me about their concerns than they might with somebody that was much younger.
I don't mean to jump the gun, but I often ask as a last question for these interviews, and I don't mean to stop us at all, let it go as long as we want, but I often ask people to sum up by saying how, if I'm leaving this for an audience of younger people,
Yeah.
is there some way you would prefer younger people to remember the World War II era the most?
Well, I think one thing is what I would call personal responsibility. I think that there was like back to my father's example of he may have, due to the Great Depression, had to go bankrupt, but he took personal responsibility for his debts and paid them off. Today, nobody wants to take personal responsibility for anything. I'm speaking very broadly here. I mean, there are exceptions. I mean, you have two Martinez boys that obviously killed their parents in the most cruel, vicious fashion possible. And they're claiming that they were mistreated by their parents, therefore they were justified in killing their parents. That upsets me. I don't care if their parents may have been in some fashion maybe not the kindest parents in the world. That does not justify killing them. And today nobody wants to take personal responsibility for what is happening to them in their lives. And I think that we need to take personal responsibility for ourselves and not say, well, I was a poor child of the Depression and I had it rough and therefore I deserve everything being given to me or something. I mean, let's don't pull that type of thing. There are people who have very limited backgrounds who make it because they change their way of thinking. They think they can make it. The trouble is that too many people are caught up on the can't syndrome, and they need to get rid of that apostrophe T and recognize that they can do it. And we need a can society rather than a can't society. And obviously I feel pretty strong about that. I feel that we need to take personal responsibility for our own actions and what we do. Anyway, that's just one of my pet concerns, is that folk...
Well, that's what I was reaching for when I asked for that. Let me bring it back to some of your
I might add something else.
Yes.
That at any given time, if we knew the life history of every patient in the hospital, we could probably account for at least 90% of why they're there.
I believe that.
In other words, if you're smoking 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes a day, you can figure you're going to end up with either a heart condition or a lung cancer or something of that nature. If you're drinking alcohol continuously, you can bet your bottom dollar you're going to end up in the hospital with a liver that's gone or whatever it is. And if you're gotten yourself into a job that is so stressful that nobody can survive in it without a massive heart attack, you can figure you're going to get your heart attack. Or if you're eating a diet that's heavy in cholesterol, you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to mess up your arteries and you're going to end up a candidate for open heart surgery. I mean, that's just the way it is. Personal responsibility.
Well, since we've gotten on our soapbox, may I ask something of your own theological development? Since I'm talking to a religion scholar, and you seem to me to have gone through. How do you look at your own theological progression? You've told me about unity, but you've also told me about
well, I started out as a fundamentalist Baptist. And it's hard for me to see how anyone who really takes religious studies seriously can remain a narrow, hellfire, damnation, fundamentalist, inerrancy, Bible-thumping person. Because when you get in and you study, it doesn't hold up. The idea that the Bible, as we have it today, is totally inerrant just doesn't hold up. Which Bible are you talking about? There are literally thousands of manuscripts and parchments of ancient scriptures. Which one of those are you going to go by? No two of them match up. You going to choose the King James as your inerrant scripture, or you see what I'm saying? I mean, when you get to studying that, you realize it doesn't hold up. And to me, the insight of the oneness of all of life and all of existence is where it is. That we are all a part of the same ultimate reality, which we call God, and that there is that of God within every single person. And we may not always acknowledge it, we may not live accordingly, but it's there. And I think the heart of God is that God is love. God is not a great big being up in the sky someplace. God is reality that is behind and sustains all of life and all of existence, at the heart of which is love. And such a God, in my thinking, does not create nor permit the vast majority of creation to be doomed to an eternal hell. I just don't buy that. I believe that that which is a part of God will always be a part of God. It may take a while for a person to wake up, as the term Buddha means enlightened, to wake up, awaken one, and it may take us a while to wake up to who we are. But I think that we are, and so I have real problems, and I run into this with people who are so distressed and so fearful because they can't have peace because of their belief in a fearful God. And they need to change their way of thinking and realize that God is not that kind of a God.
I guess what I was getting at with my question, though, is how did you come to change your way of thinking?
Well, as I through study and experience, life's experiences, I came to realize that it just didn't wash. The fundamentalists did not hold up. It doesn't hold up academically, scholarly, and it doesn't hold up as far as real peace and happiness, you see. Can you really visualize truly being happy in a heavenly state when many of your friends and your loved ones and your associates are experiencing what the fundamentalist paints as hell? You know, I mean, it doesn't hold up, either experientially or, in my way of thinking, scholarly either.
Well, the fact, let me put the fact that I may agree with you aside, and take it back to a more specific case.
Yeah.
Do you recall some of your beliefs as a young man, say, young man during the World War II era?
Yeah, I was fundamentalist during those days, certainly, and it was, and of course, this change was gradual. It was not just a sudden. There might be stages, you know, in this. When I'm studying the scriptures, for example, and learning about all of the different manuscripts that go to make up the scriptures and all these types of things, and have an aha in realization that the old fundamentalist position doesn't hold up of the inerrancy of the scripture, and because then you've got which scripture are you going to make this claim for, and recognizing the humans that were involved in it and their weaknesses, and the monks that copied manuscript after manuscript and may have been a little sleepy in the middle of the day when they were trying to stay awake, and may have or just inserted their own thinking into it. I mean, all these types of things that you discover were going on. And so you get a combination of the studies, the academic aspects of scholarship that indicate that much of fundamentalism doesn't hold up. And then you get, in terms of your spiritual growth, that you realize, can you really have peace in your own heart? Can you really have joy in your own life and in your own heart? Can you be a loving person, thinking in terms of hellfire damnation type thinking? I mean, it doesn't hold up there. It just it pictures can you really serve a God who is pictured more like a demonic figure who's directing the children of Israel to go into Jericho and kill all of the women and children and elderly and the animals even. I mean, you talk about genocide, just turn to the Bible. There's your example of genocide.
Well, let's look at other examples of genocide, like the sort of racial stereotyping that was happening during the World War II era. Did you hear of any of those atrocities during your career?
Well, of course.
The China-Burma India Theater?
Yeah, right. Well, of course, it was coming out what was happening to the Jews in Germany. I mean, that wasn't any big secret now. And of course, remember our army was segregated, and segregation was still the law of the day in the South, and would be for several more years, to the great school decision. And there was tremendous prejudice in our country. There still is, but it's not as obvious as it was then, and not near as general as it was then.
We also had enemies then. I mean, did soldiers genuinely hate the Japanese?
Well, we had a lot of propaganda, you know, about the Japanese and their emperor and all of this type of thing. And so I would say there was no doubt a lot of hate. And of course, I was fortunate enough not to have taken any life directly, in the sense of pulling a trigger. You know, it could have happened. Fortunately, from my point of view, it didn't. But each of us contributed to the death of other people, certainly. And that's war, which is, as Sherman said, is hell. And that unfortunately continues on in our world today, and I don't know if it'll ever end. I hope it will. It will from a spiritual perspective at some point in regard to you know, the final judgment, or whatever terminology you want to use, yes. But as long as the world continues, there's no doubt we've got a long ways to go before we have a world at peace, unfortunately.
That's a fact. Do you recall anything you were especially proud of, especially years from the World War II era? I asked that in a either.
Yeah. Well, I think that World War II, in a sense, may have been the last good war, you know, in which, knowing the sense that we were attacked at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese, the fact of what was happening to the Jews in Europe under the Nazis, I think that there can be a certain pride in feeling good about bringing all of that to a halt, certainly. And then, in turn, our government having the Marshall Plan and the courage to rebuild, help Europe to rebuild itself, and Japan to get reestablished. I think those are very positive accomplishments. I hope that in my career, both ministry and teaching, that I have been of some help to some people down the road. And,
sure you have. It sounds like you're doing that at the hospital.
And I hope I am doing that now.
Let me continue to hammer on what
yes.
I'm hammering on, though. Do you recall any first impressions from those years? First impressions either of one place or another?
Well, I really did enjoy my experiences in the war, which seems to be contrast. That is, I enjoyed the people contact in India and in China. I was in China about a year and a half, so I had more contact there. And in fact, it was there that I felt the calling to become a missionary. And initial plans were to return to China, but thanks to the communists, that just was not feasible. So I ended up in Argentina for a time, different direction.
What sort of work was that in Argentina?
Well, it was primarily, my primary responsibility was as a professor at a seminary there, and then I was also, though, pastor of a church in Buenos Aires. And there is a fairly good Protestant community in Argentina. It's not really so much proselyting. The Catholic Church in Argentina and in many Latin American countries, and this is true of elsewhere too, has been used for hatching, matching, and dispatching. In other words, people get their babies baptized, and then you get married in the church, and then buried by the church. And in those many years in between these events, the vast majority of people have very little to do with the church, and they're Protestant. Same thing can be said of, obviously. It was bearing a witness to a somewhat different perspective than I was with the Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ, as they're called, and who would represent a moderate denomination, not middle of the road, not fundamentalist, and not way out liberal either, but kind of middle of the road. And basically somewhat involved in educational work as well as in, and in some environments, in medical work. But my involvement was in helping to train Argentine folk to do their own ministry through the seminary there. The Christian Church, Presbyterians, Methodists, Lutherans, Waldensians, an old Protestant group, all cooperated together in Union Seminary for that purpose. Even some Mennonites that I think may have been taking some courses there, in order to have a Protestant witness in the area. A lot of folk from Protestant countries that moved to Argentina. A lot of folk in German background, British background.
Really dopey question to ask, because there is the stereotype of the ex-Nazis going to Venezuela and Argentina.
And some of them did, of course. I didn't ever know any personally, I don't think, that I was aware of, but no doubt they were there.
Was there any of the fascist element in the country while you were there?
Well, I think that there were, yes. Perón had some sympathies, I think, for the Nazis, and no doubt some of the Argentinians did.
And could talked about the war intelligently with I don't know, a youngster today. I mean, I don't know what I'm getting at. I guess could you have said what you were fighting for at that time?
Oh yes, that wouldn't have been any problem at all. I mean, we were fighting to rid the world of fascism, really. I mean, both in the Italian, the German, and to a certain extent the Japanese varieties of it, and of all of the oppression and negativity that came out of those countries. And fortunately, we were successful. I mean, the whole world would have gone a different direction had the Axis powers been victorious, without question. So, I think, you know, I don't think anybody involved in the war, it seems hard to conceive that they wouldn't have a sense of what it was about and what they're trying to do here. You know. And our country was attacked, too. That's another point. So,
did you have other family members at the time? Any
well, I'm an only child, as you might have guessed by now. But I did have first cousins that were involved. I had one in particular that was in the Marines, and he went through some of the worst conflicts, like Okinawa and some others of the war, which fortunately he survived, and we went to Baylor together after the war and had a lot of time comparing notes and whatever. I mean, his combat involvement was quite contrast to my type of involvement.
Is he still alive?
To the best of my knowledge, he is, and living in Texas and retired. He his father, incidentally, was a Baptist minister and missionary, initially in Spain and later, of all places, Argentina. And he had lived a good part of his life in Spain and Argentina, spoke Spanish as a native, in a sense, and did real well in the business world with I'm trying to think of this. It was a large corporation that produced fertilizer and whatever, and he headed up their operation in Mexico for a number of years, and did real well. Was very successful.
Could you send correspondence? Was it censored?
It was censored, yeah, but we could correspond we had post office PO numbers, you know, that you could write to soldiers overseas, and that was a good system and basically worked pretty well.
How often would you receive mail in China, Burma, India?
Oh, my, daily.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, roughly daily, yeah. Because, you know, depending on how often anybody wrote to you. But yeah, mail came in frequently. Now, when you're on the move, it might take to catch up with you, and you might get a whole bundle of mail at one time. But once you're in one locality for a time, it came pretty regularly. You know, could get packages from home, all that thing. One of the most meaningful Christmases I ever had in my life was in China. There was a Methodist orphanage not too far from our base, and we a lot of the children there, their parents were orphans. Their parents had been killed under Japanese bombings and that type of thing, and we sent home, a number of us GIs did, and had gifts sent to us to give out at this orphanage. Clothes, things that would be of value to the children, not just toys. And then one of our number dressed up like Santa Claus, and we had a real nice Christmas sharing these goodies with these orphan children. And that was one of the best, most meaningful Christmases I ever had in my life, actually.
Can you tell me which section that was in?
It was near Kunming. It was western China. And it was a Methodist mission there, where it was the orphanage and school combined. And so that was very meaningful. Felt like we had a part in something that, aside from the war effort, that was, in a sense, a part of it, though. I mean, you're making life a little bit more pleasant for some orphans, just like people are doing now in Rwanda and other places of the world where folk are trying to be of help to children that are left orphans, part of the war picture. That's so tragic.
Well, it seems that our sense of geography expands when we hear of events like those. Did you learn about these new places as you traveled there?
Well, I'm not sure. I guess I've always had a certain sensitivity to the world scene. My grandfather, after whom I was named, was the first Southern Baptist missionary to Africa after the Civil War. He went to Nigeria in 1875 as a missionary. And so I've had and then one of his daughters returned to Africa as a missionary. The daughter that Dad ultimately went in business with, who was a nurse in the nursing home business, she was a missionary to Africa. And then one of my grandfather's sons became the missionary to Spain and later to Argentina. So I had a kind of an unusual family worldwide missionary orientation. So I would be more sensitive to parts of the world that a lot of people didn't even know existed because of having had family to be there. Another cousin, who's my dad's older sister, who was born in Africa. Dad was born in Mississippi, but his older sister, not the one who he went business with, but another sister, had a son who went as a missionary to what at that time was Southern Rhodesia in Africa, and was a missionary there for a number of years. And he's living now in Nashville, Tennessee, and we talk over the phone occasionally and see each other once in a while. So we have been involved in as a family in a sense, in some of the worldwide enterprises, at least in Africa and Spain and Argentina. And so that gives us a little bit more, and then I, having spent time in China and India, more of a world perspective maybe than what some people would have. And,
have you been able to travel in recent years?
Yes, I've been fortunate in that regard. In '87 I toured Europe, and about somewhat before that, I spent some time in Korea and Japan. And then I had another trip in which I was in Spain and Portugal and that area. Of course, been to Mexico, all over the United States. So I travel more than the average person, certainly. And enjoyed it, and still try to keep some of my Spanish going and do quite a bit of Spanish translating now at the hospital.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Involved in that all the time now, because we have, it's rare, it used to be rare to have a Spanish-speaking patient.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. We, for all practical purposes, we always have them now. There's always Spanish-speaking patients in the hospital here. And somebody's got to translate for them. So when I'm at the hospital, I find myself doing a lot of that now. And I enjoy it very much. And working, get some of my Spanish back into better shape, and also working on my medical vocabulary, because my vocabulary was basically a theological vocabulary and just conversation vocabulary, and not a medical vocabulary.
Well, I have a little Spanish, which leads to a question. Did you read Spanish literature or Argentinian writers like Borges?
Well, I've some, but not in a long time. Now, I'm getting back in now. In fact, I just got 3 talking books that came in the mail today that are Spanish. And so I'm getting into them right away. And then that way I'll be hearing it just either on my cassette player or in the car or wherever I am. I'll be, you know, listening to Spanish a lot more. And this is good.
Do you speak with a southern accent? Spanish with an accent?
Well, I probably have some accent. I guess there are not many people who learn a language in their adult years who get to where they can pronounce it totally without an accent.
Would you give me a phrase or two?
Sí, cómo no. ¿Qué quiere para mí decir? ¿Cómo está, señor?
Estoy bien.
Me alegro. Yo estoy bien también y estoy trabajando cada día que voy al hospital, hablando con los pacientes, porque soy un representante de los pacientes. Es lo que yo hace allá. So for you know, I can make do. We'll put it that way. You know, I'm getting more practice now.
Actually, this brings me back to question conversation.
That's all right.
We'll wind up shortly.
Yeah.
Who spoke the language while you were overseas in China, Burma, India? Did you pick up some?
A little bit of Chinese when I was there. It's pretty well gone now, you know. How bu how and just a few little expressions.
Did you all have a little bit? Was it something you had to work at?
Well, we had little language books that were passed out so we could learn a few phrases if we needed to get along, you know. But
was that from the Army?
Yeah, from the Army, right.
I believe they used to employ anthropologists and linguists on that, yeah.
Yeah, so you know, we picked up a little, and like I say, we met Chinese. I mean, some, for example, the lady who was the principal of this Methodist orphanage I was telling you about, she spoke English very well. Her husband had a PhD from Cornell University in physics and was professor of a college there in Kunming, and he spoke perfect English. You know, and everybody was wanting to learn English. I mean, worlds of Chinese that were wanting to learn English, and in hopes of being able to use it after the war in some way. So there, you know, it wasn't. Communication goes on. You start picking up a few words, and they pick up a few words, and there's always sign language of various types. That's something else that we're doing now. We have sign language people that come to the hospital to help with deaf folk. And I was talking to one that's working with us about having a class for some of us. I'd really love to have a class and study it. And she's planning to do that in not too distant future.
Well, I'd be loath to end this without asking you to say a few words about unity, about your current spiritual calling.
Well, I feel real good about what we're endeavoring to do here in Athens with unity. I feel like that there is a need for a group like Unity represents. Unity is one of the few groups that are open, non-judgmental, loving group that accept people from a variety of backgrounds emphasize the oneness of God, the oneness of all of us as being brothers and sisters. And I'll tell you a brief story that happened Sunday, this past Sunday, that illustrates my point. I was at the hospital, and a man called my wife on the phone because we use my phone number for Unity here in town. And she said that he seemed to be rather desperate straits and gave her a phone number and asked if I could call him. So I did. And he was stranded here in town in a local motel trying to get back to Los Angeles. And he had a friend who was getting enough to him where he could get a bus ticket and a train to get to Los Angeles, but he had no funds to buy food. And he had been to see his parents on the East Coast. And he has a full-blown case of AIDS. And his family, for all practical purposes, had disinherited him. And he had been attending, he and his friend had been attending Unity in Los Angeles. And so he thought maybe if there was a Unity group here, and we're a small group, we average between 20 and 30 on Sundays, that might be able to be of some help to him. So I invited him to come to our service, but he was in such a weakened state that he said he'd better not try to venture out of the motel, and the motel was too far away. His walking there would not have been realistic. And so I said, let's see what I can do, and then I will come by your motel room after the service. And if we can get anything together, I'll bring it to you. So I told our little Unity group, there were 25 of us there Sunday evening, his story, and said, we're going to take a little love offering for him. I said, if you feel like contributing, fine. If you don't, that's fine. And I'm going to take whatever we get to him after the service. And we got $81 and some odd cents out of that little group. And after the service, I took it to him in the motel, gave him the money, spent some time with him, gave him a big hug, and we each went our own way. Well, this is Unity. How many other churches in Athens would, in a non-judgmental fashion, act in this way? I don't know. I'd like to think every one of them would. I don't know. Unitarian might. I don't know. But Unity recognizes that we are one, and we're all children of God, and therefore there is an interdependence here. It's the way we are. And we are interrelated, we're interdependent, and we're all children of God. And I'm not concerned about somebody's sexual preference. That's irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. And I think much of Unity was interesting. At the very close, one of our recent members that drives all the way from Loganville to Athens to be, he and his wife, to participate in our Unity. He told me, he said, Bill, my brother died of AIDS. He said, I really, you just. So this, is one reason that I feel comfortable in getting a unity group going, because I feel like there's a need for that type of religious community where people are accepted, no questions asked, in essence. I don't know how many people we have that are in the 12-step program that are part of unity. And one other brief story, a couple that were on the 6th floor, Athens Regional, into drugs. And I told them about unity. And they're coming very faithfully now. They went through their treatment. They're getting along well. And they're participating in our unity group. And this is it's an accepting, loving group. We have a black man that comes very faithfully, hardly ever misses. He's a local barber here in town. He was associated with Unity before we got this group going. He's been coming ever since it started. Sometimes he brings some of his community with him. Sometimes he comes by himself. And this is something, there's a need for this kind of a message in my thinking. And I think that we initially, were meeting in another location where we were asked to quit meeting because we were considered to be too heretical.
Wait, you're meeting in the Christian College of Georgia now.
Right.
You were asked to quit meeting there before?
No, we were meeting at another location.
Which will remain nameless.
Right. In which we were asked to quit meeting there because we were considered too heretical. After all, we don't believe in eternal hellfire damnation and some of those things. And some of our folk even believe in such heretical ideas as reincarnation and such things as that, from the point of view of some, are just the worst type of heresy. And therefore, to say nothing about being concerned about people with AIDS, you know, it's just, you know.
Well, did you think anything about gays in the military during the World War II era?
Not really. Not really. I'm sure there were, without question. I mean, they're part of our society, our population. And I'm certain that there were, but once in a while, you know, somebody might say, I wonder if that guy's gay. Well, I don't know. You know, you know, that kind of thing. But as far as it wasn't what it has become in other years since then. I mean, anybody that was willing, you know, it was strictly, they were in the closet. You know, I don't think anybody was going around wearing a sign saying I'm gay. But I'm sure that there were, but it was just not, a big issue was not made of it. At least not in my acquaintance it was.
I guess I've got another specific question. Because of your exposure to the healthcare profession, can you recall for me those healthcare professionals in the Chinese area that you knew during the World War II era?
Well, we had nurses and doctors that were available to us all the time. I don't know if there was anybody that was in the CBI theater for any time that didn't have dysentery. I mean, that just went with the territory. And so I had out with it. And we had, you know, the medical people were there and did their job. And I really, personally, wouldn't have anything but praise to say for the medical people, myself. I think, you know, they really did a fantastic job. I don't know how many people are alive today that would not have been had it not been for the good medics that were available and did a fantastic job.
Well,
anyway.
I've almost run dry of questions and kept you for a long time. Is there anything you'd like to add of any kind?
Oh, I don't. I would say this, that to me, this life experience is a classroom, and we're here to learn, and we're here to grow mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And I think the key thing is, are we learning? Are we growing? And I think that's what life's about, and I've been greatly blessed in being able to have the experiences that I've had and am having. And I think age is a question of where one is in their thinking. And I don't think of myself in terms of senior citizenship, older citizen, or things in those terms. I think of myself as being ageless. Maybe that's the word for it. I have friends of all ages. One other little story I'll tell you that illustrates the point. Yeah, this was Saturday night. Saturday between 7 and 8 o'clock. I was called to the emergency room at the hospital to do some Spanish translating. And a man had been in an automobile accident and didn't speak any English. And so I went to the hospital, and fortunately he was not seriously injured, was able to walk away literally after being checked out. And his sister came to give him some comfort, advice, and help. And she had 3 little daughters that were like 9, 6, and 4. And so after we did the translating and all these things, the sister and the daughters were leaving. And this little 4-year-old Spanish-speaking little doll looked up at me with her arms wide open and gave me the biggest hug you ever received from anybody in your life. Well, that was fantastic. That little old girl, you know, just out of the blue, giving me that big hug, her way of saying, thank you for helping my uncle. And, you know, it's wonderful able to be of some help to some people. And that made my day. I mean, that was fantastic. That old girl gave me a hug around my neck, brought me back to the days of the orphanage in China and the Christmas there. And things like that are what really, make you feel like, well, this is wonderful. This life is well worth living, and we learn from these experiences. And life has one challenge after another. And I just try to enjoy each one and each day. And some of us feel that accidents and that we're where we're supposed to be at the time we're supposed to be there. Whether it's interviewing with you, Brent, or they're in the hospital with that uncle and that little niece.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, that's what it's about. Or the young man coming through here on the way to Los Angeles.
Well, I want to tell you I'm very grateful for your time and for your philosophy, and thank you for coming in today.
Well, you're most welcome, Brett. Appreciate being asked, and hope you'll come one Sunday evening and be with us. Think you'd enjoy the hour.